Hello, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us today on Valentine's Day. When Catherine Hill from AAUW, our wonderful guest speaker today, when she and I first started talking about this, I just thought that Valentine's Day would be the perfect day to do a webinar on this topic. When it comes to money, is all fair in love and war? As you are about to learn from our guest speaker, when it comes to money, all is definitely not fair in love and war. It is the sad truth. Catherine will share the facts and the figures designed to empower and encourage everyone to pay greater attention to their money. The Center for Financial Social Work brings you a free webinar each month on topics we know are critical personally and professionally to our community. We offer these for free so that many of you have access to what you need to know to improve your financial well-being. As we get started, I will take a few minutes to explain what financial social work is and how it changes lives so that those who are new to our network will understand what it is we do and why we feel so compelled to do it. And we do have a high registration today, and so we know that there are new people joining us for the first time. We've been doing this work for the past 20 years. But never before in a political climate that so threatens and jeopardizes the physical, emotional, and financial well-being of all of our clients' lives and our own lives. As resources become scarcer and we all need to do more with the resources available, we want to be able to help clients and help each other take control of our money and gain control of our lives. And that's why financial social work exists. So let's go ahead and get started. I felt it appropriate to start with this graphic or meme so that we're all reminded that the most powerful relationship we'll ever have is the relationship we have with ourselves. That's such an important aspect of our daily lives. And I think it's something important to remember on Valentine's Day, because loving ourselves is the most important thing we can do. And as we move on, and I talk about financial social work and how it's impacted by the relationship we have with ourselves and with our money, you can connect back to this particular slide. And I do want to wish everyone a happy Valentine's Day. So let's get started with a poll. And here's my first poll. Let's see. All right. So in this poll, we'd love to know where you're joining us from. We know that lots of you either received an email invitation directly or had it forwarded to you from another person. And if you're from out of the country, we have had people from New Zealand and from, trying to think all of it, certainly England and Germany, join us on these webinars. If you are from out of the country, go ahead and write that in the question box. And we welcome all of you wherever you're from. So 76% of you have voted. I'm going to just count it down. And we do have a very heavy concentration. I'll show you where they're at. All right, over 80% of you voted. Thanks a lot. Let me share this with you. And you can see we have a lot of people from down south. I'm actually in Asheville, North Carolina. Our guest speaker, I believe, is in DC. I should know that. So we have some people from Canada. So let's keep going. All right, let's take a look at what financial social work actually is. Oh, I think I need to hide that poll. Okay, so financial problems. Financial problems are about more than money. As I just talked about, that relationship piece. This is a formula that I came up with a number of years ago. It looks at the fact that everyone's relationship with money and with themselves is at the root of our financial circumstances. It's our relationship with money and self that drives our financial behavior. Our financial behavior is how we earn, spend, save, share, and borrow. So how we earn, spend, save, share, and borrow determines our financial circumstances. It's as simple as that and as complicated as that. But where that arrow was twisting, it showed you that's kind of where the magic happens. And that's why our emphasis is on sustainable long-term financial behavioral change. That's what we help people to create. So dollars and cents don't make financial decisions. It's our inner money self, and we all have an inner money self. If you've never thought about it, think about it now. Say hello to your inner money self, because that's where your financial choices are made. And in so many ways, it really isn't about dollars and cents, debt, or assets. So financial circumstances originate from within the money self, and your money self includes your thoughts, feelings, and actions with your money and with yourself. Very important. So as I just mentioned, financial social work is I didn't add this part yet. It's very interactive, introspective, and it's heavily psychosocial. That's that thoughts, feelings, and attitudes, behavioral piece. Because financial well-being requires a healthier money self. And a healthier money self is someone who engages more readily, is more hopeful, is more eager to change, and is more prepared to succeed. And if you think about how you try to help clients or yourself around your money, you'll recognize why the money self is important and how being a healthier money self, having a healthier money self contributes to financial well-being. And these are some of the components incorporated into our financial social work model. It certainly incorporates the dollars and cents, everything we need to know about debt and investing and saving and the B word, even though nobody likes the B word for budgeting, we call it a personal spending and savings plan. But we also, as part of the certification, look at personal and financial boundaries, at the mindset, the poverty and the wealth. The difference is in the mindset. We emphasize that there is always hope. Okay. And our goal is to help our graduates and their clients to make peace with their money. So just a quick overview. The model is ongoing and highly experiential, addressing financial education, motivation, validation, and support. It works outstandingly well individually and with groups, and many of our graduates practice financial therapy using that model. And now it really is my great pleasure to introduce to you Catherine Hill, Vice President for Research at the American Association of University Women. Catherine, thanks for joining us and providing everything you were about to share with our audience. And I hope you'll speak a little more about yourself.
Certainly. Thank you so much for inviting me, Rita. So who am I? I'm Catherine Hill, and I'm the Vice President for Research, as Rita mentioned. I'm working at the American Association of University Women. Our organization is about 135 years old, and I'm not 135 years old, but I have been here for over a decade. So I clearly like this organization. I like our work, and I really care about our mission. Our mission is largely about gender equity, both for men and women, and looking at the economic well-being of women and their families. So, just quickly, I'll add that we are also a membership organization. We do both philanthropy, that is, we give out grants and scholarships for women pursuing their graduate degrees in education, and we do research and advocacy. I'll be talking about advocacy a little bit more at the end of our discussion. So today, I want to talk about the 3 pillars of work, family, and relationship, and how those come together to determine our economic well-being. So I wanted to just, before I begin this conversation about money, which is probably one of the least romantic topics, I wanted to begin by just reiterating what Rita shared with us, which is that caring for ourselves is critical to our ability to care for others. So we need to love ourselves, and part of loving ourselves is about taking care of our own economic well-being so that we can then help others. We have to help ourselves and get to a good place where we can be loving towards others. So that's why this is still related to love and relationships and family, even though we are going to be talking about money in the bottom line today. So these are the 3 pillars. I want to be talking about all 3 of these. And these are 3 areas where women in particular have seen an enormous change in terms of the kind of work we do and the number of us in the workforce, the kinds of families we have, the number of children we have, and how we divide that child care and the work we do in the home, and then our relationships with others. And I'm thinking about changes in marriage, divorce, the number of women who are neither married nor divorced, either in no relationship, and there are also a lot of people now who are cohabiting, who are in relationships that are neither marriage nor are they entirely separate. Next slide.
That's right.
All right, the next slide is going to be about change. So you're not going to find a pattern with all of these arrows. And the reason I wanted to include this slide is that this whole talk is about change, and that's how we need to think about these 3 pillars. They're all in constant motion and constant changes, both in our own lives and in society as a whole. But as you can see from these different arrows, we make these decisions one at a time. So we know the overall direction we may want to go, but we need to know the details as well. So I'm going to try to get into some of those real specifics so that we can make this a more concrete discussion. And let's start with the workplace.
I did not.
Okay, great. All right, these are actually moving. Maybe that's a little too much, but I want to talk about the changes in the workforce from 1960 to 2015. I hope this doesn't give you a headache. It was supposed to hold still. So we're going to see that there's a large number of women in the workforce. Women are working full-time, and we've seen an increase in their wages, but we're still making about 80% as much as men when we're working full-time. And Hispanic and African-American women are seeing slower gains, and their wages started out lower and remain lower over this time period. So we still see racism and gender bias and racial bias playing a role in our earnings. Next slide. I promise there aren't any others that move, I think. All right, so in this slide, you're looking at the big changes we've experienced with women being in the paid workforce. So let's go back to the 1950s. The black line is all women. And the blue line is for white women. The yellow is for black women. Asian women are the light purple, and Hispanic women are the green. So looking over time, we can see a dramatic shift upwards, more than doubled during this time period. Looking at black women, we see that they are the most likely to be in the labor force, where Hispanic women are the least likely to be in the paid workforce. So, by the way, we're only counting those groups from 1970 because we need to have consistent definitions of the terms in order to make comparisons, and we did not have that prior to 1970. So we didn't just leave those off by accident. But what we see here is that all women have seen a change. The number of women in the workforce kind of peaked at 2000 and has declined somewhat more recently, and some of that may have to do with changing demographics, the aging of the baby boomers, and so on. But I think the overall story here is we are in the workforce in increasing numbers, and this is, even relative to men, we are now getting closer to where they are in terms of labor force participation. So let's look at the next slide. And I want to look at the pay gap. So we're in the workforce for longer, and we're also having more lucrative careers. At the same time, women are not earning as much as men over time. So let's look at going from the 1960s up to today, and then I have a projection. And what this shows us is that there have been gains, but if you look carefully, the main gains in women's earnings relative to men were in the 1980s and 1990s. That's where you see that increase. And more recently, there's been a flattening of the earnings, with the exception of the last 2 years where we've seen an increase. Now, just to take a look at the future, I want to look at two projections that we make. The first one is the top one, which is projections of the pay gap for pay equity, and that would be based on the entire trend of the 50-plus years. And in this case, we'd see the pay gap closing in about 50 years. So the pace of change has been fairly steady and fairly dramatic over this period if it's taken all as a whole. And if that pace continues, we're looking at more equal pays much more quickly. Now, I also want to draw attention to the second line, which is another projection. And in this case, we look at just the last 15 years, where we've had largely a flat or stagnant wage gap with a small uptick in recent years. Looking just at those 15 years, we see a much different picture about when we can see the pay gap closing. So here we see that it'll be over 135 years. It'll be up into the 100 years from now, where we would see equity really coming into play. So the point here is that we don't know what the future is going to bring. Is the wage gap going to continue to close? We don't know. Will the racial gaps that we saw earlier, are those going to close? We don't know. We know where the trends are. We do see gains, but as they say with all kinds of expenditures, right, we do the future gains are the past performance and future gains are not one and the same. So let's take a look at the next slide. Here we go, looking at the pay gap by race. I was just talking about that. And what you see here is that the top line is for Asian women, and compared to white men, Asian women are doing pretty well. They are certainly earning the most among all women. The light blue line is for white women. And then we have quite a drop in earnings for black women, and Hispanic women are at the bottom of that totem pole. We also should note that for black and Hispanic women, there is a slight uptick, but really fairly flat. We'll go to up. There we go. And then the other two, among white and Asian women, we are seeing more of an increase. So when we say the pay gap is closing, we are really seeing those changes in the white and Hispanic and Asian communities, and not so much in the black and Hispanic communities. So we really need to think about raising wages for groups of women in different occupations, different fields, and by different racial and ethnic backgrounds. So next, let's
Oh,
do a poll.
let's do a poll.
Okay.
All right. Someone, as I get this poll up, we do have someone on the webinar from Germany. So that's interesting. And
Welcome.
someone else shared that they're having trouble seeing the screen, but I think everyone else is okay. I hope so. Okay. Here we go. Let's launch it.
I won't just talk about lines next as we go forward. I'll try to give you the actual numbers and talk about the concepts. All right, so this is a poll. Shall I read it out, Rita? So the question is, women, do you earn more than your mother did? And men, does your sister or wife partner earn more than their mother?
Oh, this is interesting. I wouldn't. Okay. There's some surprises for me here. All right.
This is very
About 70%. Okay, over 70% of you have voted. We'll give it another few seconds. I'll count it down. And I'll go 5, 4, 3. If you want to vote, now's the time. 2, 1, and we'll close it. So we have almost
8.
So 80% of you voted, and here's the results. Anybody else surprised that some of us are earning less?
I think this is, in some ways, this is what I kind of expected to see, which is more women are earning more than their mothers, and probably working longer as well. And there are some who are earning less than their mothers, and there are, among the men who are joining us, we see less of a difference. And there are, of course, some people who aren't sure of this. But I think that overall what we see is that in this generation, women are working more, they're earning more, and they're working for a longer period of time. So I think this is, you guys are in keeping with what we see in the rest of the population.
Okay.
All right, so I just want to get the bottom line for the workplace, and then we're going to move on to the 2 other pillars of our economic well-being. And so the good news is there are more women at work, many of them by choice, but probably some of them are there only because they have to be. The pay gap is smaller than it's been in the past, especially for white and Asian women, with some progress for Black and Hispanic women. But we're still overall earning 20% as much as men working full-time, and among Hispanic and African American women, we see much larger gaps. And we're going to talk more in the question and answer about why we see these pay gaps, but just briefly, part of that has to do with the kinds of jobs that women and men hold, and a part of it does have to do with gender bias and discrimination, often the kind of bias that we're not even fully aware that we have. But the bottom line is we're seeing economic improvement from a large majority, for many women, for most women, with some women not keeping up. So now let's turn to the next pillar. All right, these motions I'm not so sure about, but we're going to be talking now about motherhood. And we're going to see changes here in the number of mothers in the workforce. We're going to look at birth rates among younger women and among women overall. And then I also want to talk briefly about households, or what we call the unpaid labor. And there we're seeing a continuing asymmetry. That is, women are still holding down the family and the household, and they're the ones doing more of the housework, more of the child care, and more of the grunt work in families. So that unpaid work is very important to take a look at, because that's an area where we don't tend to look at it closely. We don't tend to document those decisions, and they're important decisions in our overall well-being, because we all have just those 24 hours in the day, and that has a big effect on the amount of paid work we can do. So let's move to the next slide. And what we see here is the number of births per 1,000 women for women in two similar age groups. The lines are not showing up on this. You want to press the enter button again and see if the lines will emerge. It's a little hard to read with just these points. There we go. That's what I was looking for. So looking at the 25 to 29-year-olds, you see a decline in the number of women giving birth. And there's even a sharp decline among those in their 20s to 24 years of age, from looking at back in 85 to the present. And what we were trying to show in the other slide is that overall birth rates are down. What's also interesting is that birth rates are lowest among the younger women, that the shift has been, a greater change has occurred among young women, which means we're having fewer children, and we're having children later in our careers. And it has two economic effects on us. One, with fewer children, there are fewer people that we can depend on in our old age for assistance, for help in caring for us and for simply being a backup. The other thing it suggests to us is that as the age of having children rises, there is more of a conflict between work and family. As we are trying to raise children just as we are reaching our peak earning years in our 30s and early 40s. So there are different implications to the choices we're making about raising children. And I think that's an important way to look at the whole picture. So we're just thinking through, what are the economic implications of the number of children I have, when I have those children, and whether I have those children in a relationship where I'm doing only half of the work, not most of the work or all of the work. Next. This is an important slide, but I'm going to tell you right off the bat that I'm afraid that the numbers on the left are incorrect. So just bear with me. The point here is that the number of women who are childless at the age of 44 has increased twofold over this period from 1975 to 2015. So not twofold, I'm sorry, by about 10 points. So it's a big increase. It's not doubled. And what I think here is important is that when we're childless, we have an economic benefit of not interrupting careers. At the same time, looking down the road, we see less of an option for having young people in our lives who can help care for us and be financially a backup. So just something to keep in mind as we think about all of our choices. Let's look at the next slide. And, oh, good. Let's take a look at another poll. Rita, do you want to start them off?
I do. I'm pulling it up, and here we go. All right. I imagine, Catherine, you have an idea what to expect from this.
Mm-hmm.
I don't.
Well, I'm seeing it already. I'm going to give people a little suspense and then tell them in just a minute. But people are, yeah, this is kind of what I would expect. But that's good because it means that what we're seeing is in our own lives is what we're seeing among the whole population of women. And obviously for men, why don't you think about that in terms of yourself as a father, if you plan to have more children than your parents or your father had, and so on. Okay, well, I think this is quite interesting now.
Okay,
So,
you have 3 seconds, and I'm going to close it out. We have about 75% of you have voted. I'm going to go ahead and close it and share the results. Go ahead, Catherine.
Wonderful. So this is not especially surprising, but I think it's quite telling. About half of you plan or have fewer children than your mother did. And this is something we see overall in the American population. About a fifth of you don't have, they already have, I'm assuming, more or the same number. no would be the same, and then more children would be about 9%. So we're seeing, there is some people who are having more children, but it's a minority of those who are in that situation. A small number are still undecided, and there's about 15% who are not planning to have children. And that is actually quite an unusual decision for people to make. I happen to have made that decision as well, and I enjoy being an aunt, but I let my sister and my brothers do the hard work. But I do love being with kids, but I think more and more women are choosing not to have children. I think in the past, there were always women who did not have children, and in some cases it was a physical reason, or they didn't have enough money to do so, or they did not find a partner who was suitable for them. But I think now we're also seeing women who are simply making that choice. And I think that is has a number of different important implications for us. So for those women like myself who are childless, I think it is especially important that we have savings and that we think of ourselves, think of your older self, and think about putting aside the resources you need to make sure that you're comfortable and happy in your retirement ages. Okay? All right, so I want to just take a little step back and look at our overall well-being is made up of these three areas. We see the work, and as I said before, we're seeing an increase in women's earnings over time. They're working longer and they're working more lucrative positions. On average, that's not for everybody. More women are having fewer children, and a larger number are not having children at all. And this has an implication for our overall well-being in the future. And it also is a challenge for women who have young children while they're a breadwinner. More and more women are the breadwinners for their children, both as single mothers, but also as women in cohabitating relationships. And we'll talk more about that as we move forward. But right now, I want to turn to marriages, divorces, and what I call neither. So let's take a look at marriages and divorces. All right, so this chart shows us the trends in marriage and divorce from 1960 to 2015. And what we see is that there was a sharp increase in divorces from 1960 to 1980. And likewise, there was a movement upwards in the number of marriages, and then a sort of a little bit of a drop. And then from 1980 onwards, we see a decline in both marriages and divorces. So, of course, these two phenomenon have something to do with each other, because you can't have a divorce if you never get married. But what this shows us is not so much that men and women or gay partners are not living together, but it is they may be living together, being partners, but they're also not married. And that's going to make some differences in terms of our economic outcome at the end of those partnerships. Hopefully these partnerships never end, but I think all women need to have a second plan, Plan B, and you might even need Plan C. So I think it's important for us to look at our romantic relationships with a bit of a cold eye. Not that we don't appreciate them as simply romantic, but that we understand the economic component of this as well. So let's take a look at our next slide. And I wanted to look at children and marriage together because it's really quite interesting. Looking back 50 years, we saw many more parents were married spouses. What we see today, by the way, is that marriage spouses are not only, first marriages, but also second marriages. So in that case, the children are from one marriage or the other. And in that case, there's, I think, a different relationship between step-parents, in some cases, and first parents. And this has an economic relationship in terms of, for example, paying for college for your children or other kinds of expenses that may or may not be shared. It really depends on the individual relationship, but it's just something to keep in mind. I also want to point to a number of other parts of this pie. You see the light green, which is about 60% of all the families with children under 18. And in those families, the green represents one-parent households, of whom nearly most are female-headed households. The little orange slice is two cohabitating adults with just one of whom is a parent and the other is not. And they may or may not be in a romantic relationship. And the 5% there are people who are living together, not married, and they have a child together. So what we're seeing is some differences of the kind of households where the ways in which we have children, the kinds of relationships that we're in when we're parents. And these relationships have profound effects on our own finances, our economic responsibilities towards our children and towards any stepchildren. And I think this will also come to play as we look at elder care. In second marriages, we tend to see more of a division between the caregiving that we see in first marriages. So I want to take a look at this phenomenon of remarriage and second marriages. All right. Now, I didn't put this up to depress you, but I wanted us to take a look at this because it really is important for us to keep all of these facts in the back of our minds as we make decisions. And I wanted to talk about some of the challenges that women face when they marry someone who is older than they are. And those challenges tend to come into play during retirement. In particular, those challenges include who gives care for whom, who is the first spouse to use the economic savings of the couple for any illness or caregiving that's needed, and some of the disadvantages that the younger spouse faces in terms of the resources for retirement and the in-family caregiving. So let's look at the younger spouse and the older spouse, and let's look at men and the younger spouse. So men in their first marriage, we see that their spouse is younger than them about 15% of the time, and 5% they are 10 years or more older than their spouse. Now on the second or third marriage, we see, or I guess it could be fourth marriage, but for the most part 2 marriages, we see a large percentage marrying women who are 10 years or more younger than themselves, and a fairly large percentage of them also in that 5 to 9 years difference. Then there's some, of course, who are in the same category, but then we see a difference among older spouses. So that's the picture for men. And what that means for men is that they're more likely to have a spouse who can provide care in the home. They're going to be more likely to have access to the couple savings, whether that's in a house or whether that's in retirement accounts. So let's look now at what women do. And what we see is that in their first marriage, women are more likely to marry an older spouse. I guess that's not that surprising, given that most of this data, by the way, is only for heterosexual couples. We don't yet have data that involves other kinds of couples. But what we see here among women and men is women are more likely to marry an older spouse, and in their second marriage or third marriage, they are much more likely to marry an older spouse. So I think this is a sobering look. It's perhaps an unromantic look, but it's an important factor to consider as we look at our marriages, remarriages, and our relationships. Caregiving is going to be part of all relationships, and one can never know how it's going to end up. And yet, age is a good indicator of the way we're expecting that division of labor, that unpaid labor, to be divided. Let's move to the next slide. I just want to raise a point which I haven't said yet. Is I've used data from many different sources here. That particular graph was from the Pew Foundation. There were most of the other graphs are from the Census Bureau or the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So this is not new data. It's data that's out there in these government sources and at other nonprofits, but I am sharing it with you. In some cases, like in that last one, it was directly the same chart, but I wanted to just point out that I'm borrowing from these groups, and you can see the sources and you can look them up yourself if you're interested, because there's lots more interesting data. We have another quick poll.
Obviously, the majority of our audience is female.
Mm-hmm.
But we are so glad we have some men with us, because all of this impacts the whole family if you're raising a family.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So
great.
I will go ahead and close this poll, and we can share it with everyone. Go ahead, Catherine.
Okay, wonderful. So the question was, are you younger than your spouse or partner? And for men, are you older than your spouse or partner? And among women, about half are younger, and about 40% are older. So for the most part, that is similar to what we see, although I will say this is more evenly divided than we see in the population as a whole. So I think some of you may already have thought about some of these issues, and you're a little bit ahead of the curve in thinking through relationships in this way, or you're just lucky and that's where it all ended up. And among men, they do tend to be older, but I think we don't have as many men. So I think that what we see here is that the pattern is less pronounced among all of you than it is for the population as a whole. And again, I don't want to be completely unromantic. I mean, but I think what I'm saying here is not that we don't marry who we love, but that we are conscious of and think about those issues. All right, so my bottom line here is that despite working more hours, working longer, and having more responsibility for children and our own economic well-being, we're not seeing it add up to better economic security for ourselves. And here are a number of the key points. So we have that longer and more lucrative careers, but still there is a pay gap between what full-time men and women are earning. And even when we control for other factors like the kinds of jobs we have, or our education, or our ages and time in the workforce, we still see a gap between men and women. It's smaller, but we still see that gap. In the last 50 years, women have become more likely to be breadwinners for their families, either joint breadwinners with their husbands or partners, or they tend to be more likely to be single parents, and more likely to be responsible for themselves economically. There are more women who are not married, and this is even in their 40s and 50s, and while some people may marry after that, it's expected that many of those never married women are not going to choose to marry and are going to be economically responsible for themselves during their careers. And the last thing I wanted to point out is that this age gap in second marriages in particular does have implications for caregiving and well-being in retirement, and it's something we should all be aware of, both in terms of the kinds of savings that we make, how we divide up labor, how we think about the economic decisions of our household. All right, let's go to the next slide. All right, so the next couple comments I want to make are about how to be prepared for economic well-being now and in your retirement, and that's going to happen with or without Mr. Right or Ms. Right. Next slide. So I'm going to give advice here for us as individuals and then also for what we can do as advocates for other women and families. So for individuals, education still pays off. At some point, the debt is not worth it, but with affordable debt, getting a higher degree is going to help you earn more and have a more stable career. Pay attention to the choice of careers. What we find is that the women in fields that are traditionally male, like engineering and technology and business, tend to earn more than women in traditionally female fields like nursing and teaching and childcare. And it's interesting too, actually, the men who are in quote unquote women's jobs also earn considerably less than other men. So it's about the job as much as it is about the individuals. So think about your career choices. Now, I know you're social workers, so perhaps you're not in the most lucrative career, but there are many kinds of rewards. So that's just something for us all to keep in mind. And the other thing I wanted to mention was negotiating our pay. AAUW has a number of workshops that we offer for young women and for all women. And we talk about how to negotiate carefully. Negotiating is a little harder for women because it requires us to step outside of traditional gender norms. And people tend to react negatively, usually without being conscious of it, but they react negatively when someone is not behaving in what they consider to be the way men or women should behave. So if you're not acting in a ladylike fashion, you can be penalized for that, and often negotiation is seen as, a more masculine activity. At the same time, there are ways around that by getting good information and by practicing your pitch. And we have that in our workshops, and there are lots of other places you can go to learn more about negotiation. Now, we are also advocates. We care about this for all women. Excuse me. Right now, I think there's a lot of interesting work going on at the state level. Nearly all states have some kind of equal pay law, but they vary a lot in how effective they are. So come to our website and learn about the state laws in your state and learn about what the best state laws are and how you can kind of emulate or try to encourage your lawmakers to build a more effective and powerful state law about fair pay. We also suggest that you ask companies to, and those who are involved with companies, to sign the Equal Pay Pledge. Now, the past presidential administration, the Obama administration, had created a pledge where companies could make a public statement that they believed in equal pay, and they plan to take those lessons, take this principle to their own workplace. It doesn't require enforcement, but it does suggest that these companies are self-consciously making a commitment to the concept of equal pay. And this is an area where we hope to see additional work going on in this area, whether it's at AAUW or one of the other many wonderful women's organizations. And finally, I want to mention that Equal Pay Day, and I'm sorry, I seem to have misspelled the word there, but Equal Pay Day is on April 4th, and there are a number of really interesting activities we'll have. Many groups will be holding activities, both web-based activities. There'll be lots of things you can do in your community. AAUW members do some fun things this time of year. They have bake sales and take cut off a part of the cookie. They sometimes you can get a restaurant to give women 20% off their meal. There's been bars that have given 20% off drinks. So there could be some fun things to just drive home the fact that women are earning less on average.
Before I go to your next slide, I would like to tell everyone in the audience that on Equal Pay Day, we will be offering a free webinar on the gender of money. And there is a gender of money, and we call that Feminomics. So you will be getting that invitation, and I hope you'll join us. Okay.
That sounds That sounds wonderful. I'll try to join you too.
There you go. We'd love to have you.
I just have a few more minutes because I know we're running out of time, but I wanted to mention what we need to do in terms of our families. And for individuals, we need to think and plan when we're going to have our children and think through how not just allow this to happen to us, but to make it happen in the way that it works best for our whole lives. I have here find a village. Whether or not you're married, you're going to need other adults to help raise a child and to be able to bring different perspectives and ideas to your child. So we all need a village. And by the way, if you look over at advocacy, for those of us who are not parents, we need to be part of that village. For individuals, I wanted to mention flexible work. And I put in here computing because I think we too often think about jobs without thinking through what is really going to be flexible. So my mother was a teacher, and she was a teacher because she perhaps thought she did think that it would be a good balance of being a mother. But one of the challenges of teaching is you have to be in the classroom, and that can cause a lot of conflicts. Now, jobs that can be done at home, like computing, are actually more flexible than many of the jobs that we think of as traditionally female jobs. So it's an interesting perspective and something to think about. Looking at advocacy, I think that child care and public funding for child care is really at the top of the list. And there are also a number of both state laws and federal laws that we need to both protect and expand. And this is in terms of sick leave, family medical leave, and pregnancy discrimination. I wanted to mention that, nearly half of the American workforce doesn't even have sick leave. And another portion of the workplace cannot use sick leave to care for their children. So this is the basic level of flexibility we would like to see from really every company and from every workplace. And we can do that by being advocates at the federal and state level. And as I mentioned before, AAUW has a 2-minute activist, which is really 2 minutes. If you go to our website and you see the information on the particular bill that we're highlighting, and you can we'll find your representative for you, and you just need to either sign the letter or modify the letter, and we'll send it off for you. All right, romantic relationships, well, chocolate is, of course, the most important part. I wanted to mention, making these choices self-consciously. I also would suggest that people write them down, because when we write things down, we're more conscious of whether they're fair or not. I want to stress the question of avoiding Mr. Wrong. I think too many women want a husband or a partner regardless of whether it's going to be a good marriage or good relationship. And I think that really we need to stress to ourselves and to our children that we can live happily ever after with or without Mr. Right. And I just wanted the last point on advocacy, of course, at the worst and the extreme, we need to think about preventing domestic violence and other forms of abuse. But let's go to our next slide. I think that, finally, the last poll question.
I'm getting that up. Okay. As you answer this poll, I would just like to point out that certainly one of the goals of this webinar and most webinars we have are to help to provide you with new ways of thinking about financial well-being and your financial health and financial future, and that it's meant, as Catherine had said, to be positive, not negative. 73% of you have voted. I'm going to go ahead and close this so that we have time for Q&A. If you have any questions, go ahead and write them in the question box because we're about to finish up here. And here's your results, Catherine.
Oh, yes. Well, I wanted to say this is a pretty hopeful group. I think that it's only 16% who say that they don't think so. But a majority, yes, and I am hopeful is nearly at 40%, and about 43%. No, I'm sorry, that's at about 43 said that they're working towards that goal. And I'm not sure that's equal 100, but nevertheless, yeah. But so I think we see that only about 16% don't think you're in the right direction. So I think what I want to stress here is that in all of our lives, we think not only about the love we feel for others, but the way we feel about ourselves and about the respect we give ourselves and the attention we give to our economic well-being so that we can love ourselves and we can love others. So on this Valentine's Day, I want all of us to think about love in all dimensions.
And I certainly feel the same way. I put this in there, Catherine, for you, everyone. I am a proud member of AAUW. I love the work they do. I follow them on Twitter. I retweet them. I encourage all of you to do the same thing. If you go to their website, you can find this 2-minute advocacy piece, which is so important now more than ever. And Catherine closes hers with talking about loving yourself, as I opened mine with loving yourself. So before we take Q&A, I just wanted to tell everyone about our certification. These are the basics. I don't have to read through all of them. Many of you on the call are graduates of the program, and we're happy you're here. We're happy everyone's here. We love sharing good information with you to help you improve your financial circumstances and become more financially stable. So let me see what we have in the way of questions. Okay. Okay. I am having some trouble. Can you open those questions, Catherine? I don't know why I can't.
Let's see if I can. I am not sure that I can either, but I wanted to mention if you do have questions and I don't answer them today, you can always contact us at AAUW, and we're on the web. You can also just go to our Connect page, and they will find me or find one of my colleagues, and we can provide information to you, whether that's about a negotiation workshop or whether that's about our advocacy work or if it's about our research.
Okay,
so connect with us. We're happy to help.
Oh, that's helpful. Or you can also reach out to me, and I'll get your email to Catherine. Here someone says, I am a 30-year-old woman, have a postgraduate education, huge personal finance nerd. How do you recommend I talk with gal pals about the importance of financial planning? That's a good question.
Mm-hmm. I'm really glad to hear that you're just in your 30s and beginning your 30s, because you have the time to really make a big difference, not only through savings, but also through some just smart choices that we need to make. One thing I always say to younger women is, let's pay attention to the cost, the debt we incur as we get our degrees. That is not that we don't get our degrees, because it's absolutely important for us to be well educated. At the same time, let's pay attention to the amount of the debt we take on. And I think that I would ask young women to think about their relationships in terms of both romance and economics, and to simply write down what your expectations and thoughts are for yourself. Maybe you share them, maybe you don't, about what you're expecting in terms of unpaid work, about household, running the household, and where you're hoping the relationship will go, so that you're conscious of the choices that you're making. Don't just let it happen to you. You go ahead and make the choices, whatever choice you choose. There's nothing wrong with having a relationship where one person is the primary breadwinner and one person largely takes care of the home. That's not a bad arrangement for many people, but be conscious of the choice.
I would certainly agree with that. I would encourage you also to Invite your friends to our Gender Money webinar on Equal Pay Day, April 4th. I think they'll get the message from that one. What are the economic effects of cohabitation without marriage on women without children?
That's an excellent point, but I'm going to just give one example. I'm going to talk about Social Security. So there is something called the spousal benefit that goes to people who have been married for 10 years or more. You can be divorced, but if you're married for 10 years or more, you're eligible for a benefit based on your husband or wife's earnings. So for women, in many cases, the husband is earning more than the wife, and in that case, your benefit could be based on his higher earnings. And this is true whether or not you have children. So if you're not married, you're giving up that amount of money, that right to benefit based on his earnings. And this is a really big deal when we get to being a widow or a widower. What we see is that you then adopt the full benefit from the partner, from the husband, or from the wife. In this case, we'll talk about the husband. And that can be substantially higher. So it's not that no one has to get married, and it may not be the right choice for you. But there are issues relating to our retirement security, money we're leaving on the table when we don't get married, and that also can have effects on us in terms of health benefits, retirement benefits, the kinds of choices we're making in terms of what happens if the relationship ends. We all hope relationships will never end, and let's plan that they don't end. But again, I want to talk about that plan B and plan C. So it's good to be economically independent regardless of where we are.
Catherine, thank you so much. Thanks everyone for attending. You can watch for the recording in all the places I already mentioned, our YouTube, our Facebook, our blog. And we'll be back here on March 9th with a wonderful guest speaker, and then again on April 4th for Equal Pay Day. Catherine, lots of people are sending in their thanks and appreciation for all of your wonderful information. So
thank you so much for having this opportunity to talk with everyone.
All right. Okay, everybody, have a beautiful rest of the day. Bye now.